cover that?
Well, we limited it. I mean, are you saying that we can require only the on-site parking to be residential parking? I think
Yeah, I mean, that's, if we're giving them spots to resident, we're saying there's no resident, but there's not gonna be any impact to the neighboring street.
well,
And then these people move into the apartments in there, and we're told by either the landlord or market conditions that if you want the parking, you have to pay 100 or the
well, we reviewed this in light of what's under the current ordinance. And under the current ordinance, if you wanted to just make that all residential, you could fill your on-street parking requirements, but then the residents could have as many parking permits as they have vehicles, and there's no caps to that. And they could do that right now under the current ordinance and clear out that entire corner with their cars. This one says no. I'm trying to find something to give credence to the residents that are there, and these people would be Narberth residents, saying you don't have the same rights as everybody else to get 5 permits if you have 5 cars. You can only have 1. And if you get your on-street parking, off-street parking space that's open, great. But
the residents are only getting one permit?
residents are only getting 1 permit under this.
Okay, that answers that question.
So it caps it.
Okay.
However, those residents would still be able to park in front
They're
of
only getting 1 per unit. That's,
1 per unit.
that serves that question, really. That's
Right,
what I
we're not
was.
talking about a lot of units.
Yeah, okay, that's all. I mean,
Fewer than
that was the
5.
question. The second question is more theoretical because we know how many 2-hour zones we have. And, you know, some of them are needed, some of them are not needed. Neighbors like them. But we have a history of, you know, if neighbors come in with a significant amount of neighbors that want a 2-hour zone, we give that to them. So, ideally, I know we've been talking, we'd like to figure out a borough-wide parking, which we're not that close to at this point. I just, want to say what happens if the 4 or 5 blocks nearby move to a 2-hour, request 2-hour zones, and you've got 25 to 50 new cars from this office complex. Is there? We've got some rough ideas of parking there, and there's different counts, and not really a strong determination of what is proper. Is it 80% parked? Is it 100%? Is it 50%? What works in these narrow streets? Because you have yield traffic and such. I don't know if this takes into account. If somebody goes, I'd hate to see them build this complex, spend all this money, and then people start parking on 1 block because that's the closest. Those neighbors come in, and we continue to see that. And now we've got a situation where he's developed a wonderful building, he's invested all this money, and it's the people that are going to work there, the use, have to go park in Lower Merion, which is probably even more restrictive in a lot of ways. So, I mean, is there?
The municipality's planning code is, in its wisdom, has given us a planning body called the Planning Commission, and it's their job at our request to sort of probe down into that question and to establish is there adequate parking. I think I know that some preliminary numbers have been gathered. There's been a census at a better time of year than the summer. It was in October. An October census, I think there's a census done all through the month of October. And we won't do this unless there's adequate parking. That would just not make sense. And I think let's have the planning commission do it. Since they're the ones who've been actually entertained by the specific proposal, we haven't. We don't know what the details of that.
I guess, leading off of Bob's question, if you're going to develop a building or if you're going to live in a neighborhood for 50 years, you want to know some sense of security that tomorrow is going to be kind of like today. And that cat and mouse game of parking goes here, and then we restrict it, and then is there a limit to what we can restrict? We can't pass an ordinance like this, permit a use, and then take away all, make everything a 2-hour zone, and then it's like, haha,
Well, it's not a ha-ha, it's a, you know, just as he wants the security, I would
Right,
imagine as a
there's
developer.
that balance.
The neighbors probably look to that same security.
Right, and I wouldn't want to handcuff either side completely, so that,
I mean, I think it's fair to say that there has to be reasonable parking accommodations that would be made. I mean, the condition that would be put on the conditional use order could say, you are going to park between this, was permitted between this street and this street, unless other reasonable accommodations could be made. It would then be up to council to go back under that order to talk to the developer if there was a desire to make that 2-hour parking, and there's other reasonable accommodations that could be made. As long as they're okay with that. And if they're not, then yeah, it is going to be a dispute. But this clearly is set up under an assumption that there are reasonable parking accommodations that could be made, that are available.
and you're saying the planning commission does that now.
They do that analysis, and this business wouldn't be unique. There are businesses all throughout the borough of Narberth where we would have to find appropriate parking for the business owners and their employees if we were to create a comprehensive parking scheme. I mean, it's, yeah. That would have to be done.
So let's get back to the percentage then. We're going to put something forward in December to the council. You know, how do we come up with a percentage of, requirement that makes sense? I mean, what would your
I mean,
recommendation?
to start though, Sean, I mean, under the form zoning code, for every parking, that number would be 50%. Is that correct?
That's a good ballpark, yeah.
So 50% as the form zoning code passes is sort of the threshold right there. Whether there should be anything less than 50% because of the restrictions on the on-street parking and the requirement that it be made close to a public transportation. That would be what would be provided to see if you want it down.
I guess I'd like to do what the planning commission would recommend. I'd also like to be sure that that percentage, whatever that percentage is, that it accommodates 100% of the residential parking. And then maybe you would consider not issuing residential permits.
Making it even more restrictive.
As even more restrictive, if you say, let's park 100% of the residences on the site and not provide permits at this time. I mean, perhaps in a future scheme where if we create a future permitting scheme where the permits, where the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th permit the resident wants has a greater value, has an escalating value, then maybe you would offer a permit at an escalating value. But in the short term, restrict them to parking on the site. And maybe choose a percentage that requires that all the residential parking can be accommodated on the site.
So how many spots would 50%?
So we have not been presented with a scheme, so we don't know. We really, I would suggest that we have planning commission suggest a number to us, recommend a number to us. We could go tomorrow night and be in the discussion, but I think, it's not even, the property owner hasn't even made a presentation to us, so we don't have any basis for the discussion.
Okay.
Other than our visits to the planning commission. That's,
Yeah, I don't know how we can decide to ask questions about this. There's nothing we can, until we have a scheme, we're going to have to wait till next month's meeting, I guess, to recommend. Just trying to do this.
I think you're.
you're right, I don't think we can.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't
But then
think
I'm fine with not coming up with answers
okay.
until, if we're not planning on recommending this in the December council meetings, then.
Well, we
We'll see what the
might
president.
introduce it, it depends where we are.
Well, if we're going to, I want the committee in front of the public to discuss these things before we introduce it to council, because they come to our meetings.
We'll have a committee meeting on the first Monday of December, which precedes the caucus meeting. So the caucus meeting is what, on the 6th? Is that correct?
No, that's the Sunday, and it's gonna be on the 9th.
And then, so the committee meeting will take place on Monday the 7th. So we will have an opportunity to discuss,
So you'll have an opportunity to speak to the planning commission, cycle back around,
come back to the
and
building
then
and
have
zoning
another committee
committee,
meeting on December 7th.
and then we can decide. That's fine.
I'm out that day.
Okay, you can phone in.
It doesn't work.
What time?
7,
7 p.m.
let's make it at 7.
So I do want to ask, how many? Yeah, it's my son's birthday, so.
You can make a morning.
Yeah.
I can make arrangements.
So let's look at the calendar. We'll, when we schedule it, we'll make sure it's advertised and publicized.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to hold up this
It's your
meeting.
son's birthday.
I just.
Bring him to the meeting.
Yeah, that's how he wants to spend it.
That's how I spent my 18th birthday. Anyhow, so that's, I still think, I just want to get a quick sense that 50% of, when we have an idea of a square foot, so if we went with just, and we're not going to come up with a standard 50%, I just want to know what number of cars we're working from at the 50% mark, based on 5,000 square feet.
One space per 500 square feet roughly.
So they would need roughly 10 spaces, and that, the frontage wouldn't be captured in this, so they'd have to find 10, if it was a 50%, they'd have to find 10 spaces on surface, which we're certainly not going to ask them to do. So, okay, that's,
I'm not sure where you're based. So I tried to figure out, let's compare, I want to compare my numbers with yours. I tried to figure out what the grandfathered church parking would have been.
I had no
And
idea
so-
how to figure
and
that
I
out.
saw that there were two numbers. There was
Okay.
one was the space of the pews, and then there was one parking space for every 10 seats within the pews. And then I noticed there was a second number, which was all the other space of the church, not the sanctuary space, like the offices, the basketball court, the classrooms, whatever else is there, was one space per 100 square feet. So I figured that just for the extra space, it's probably 50 parking spaces for the 5,000 ancillary spaces. And then if there were, say, 20 pews, conservatively, let's say there were 20 pews there, that would be 20 parking spaces, so the total would be 70.
so is he going to be putting a church in there?
No, I'm saying that that's the grandfather, that's the grandfather church space.
So
No,
you
we
tried
don't-
to
I
make
don't
that
know.
calculation, you came
I
up
was
with
just
70
trying to make the
spaces.
calculation of what the grandfathered church parking was.
Trust me, I've been down that road.
Does that seem concerning?
He wants to put a church in there.
I trust you looked at it. I didn't look at it in depth because I stopped when I couldn't figure out how many pews fit in the space.
Even if there were no pews, it would be 50. Anyway, we don't know, we don't have a way to figure out what the proposed.
Yeah, but we know he's not putting a church. Good.
It depends on, if they sold it and someone wanted to buy it and use it as a church.
That's right, so 50. Anyway, maybe it's neither here nor there. Well, why don't, I don't know if we need a motion to direct the planning commission to take it from here, or we just, let's just.
I think they're going to be doing that.
Let's all agree to ask them, whether that's their job, so.
Okay.
So that's all. I suppose if there's anyone at this point that's, public comment is not an official part of a committee meeting, but since there's many of you here, and I imagine some people may have something to say, we're happy to listen. We have some of us have someplace to go, so if you could keep your remarks brief, you'll have another opportunity at the caucus of the council, at the building and zoning meeting on the 7th, and there's a planning commission meeting tomorrow night, and there's a caucus on the 9th, so it's not the only opportunity you have. If you would like to speak, please give your name and address and make your comment.
I'll start.
Carol Marie Scanlon, Sabine Avenue. Now, is this comment that we are going to be speaking about just in regards to parking for the churches and for the office buildings? All right. So my comment is this, is with the grandfather building, corner of our street has an office building. They have a parking lot. They also have 13 parking permits on our street. And basically, that office building owns our street, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 5 days a week. And
I'm sorry, what street again?
Sabine.
Okay, thank you.
Now, yes, I have a driveway, and we keep our boat in our driveway, and we keep the driveway open during the day because my husband is a plumber and he comes in and out all during the day. So I may park in the parking lot, I may park down in front of the neighbor's house. I mean, it is an issue when you're talking about 50% of the planned parking in any new building. And my question is the ordinance going to be changing to the existing buildings? Because rumor has it that parking permits are going to be given to neighbors that have driveways, 1 parking permit per household. So is that a yay or a nay? I mean, that's one reason why I came, is because that was mentioned to me that, oh, you have a driveway. And
No
you're
one's ever discussed limiting the number of parking permits that would be available
for
to
residents. But
And
it's
only
really,
in the context of this ordinance did we talk about not allowing an office use any permits at all. Only in the
Gotcha.
context of this. And the reason is so that the people who would be working in that office couldn't own the street.
well, and that's a problem on our street.
Yeah.
And I would like to know, can we get that changed? Because this particular office building has its own dedicated parking lot that they don't use. They say they use it for their clients who come and go. And they also can park in that nice big parking lot, which is over 50% empty, the old school parking lot. And they get all these resident permits, so they say, heck, why should we walk 10 extra steps or, up and down? And the gate is open. I've pointed it out to the office people. They're like, oh yeah, how about that? And they still park in front of our houses. And I mean, literally, they have 13 spaces and they own our block every single day. So that's my comment as to parking is tough, and I totally understand, progress is great. But the residents, I think, need to take precedent over office workers.
Thank you.
Well put.
Thank you.
I see a hand.
Yeah, Robin Bernholz, Marion Avenue, Narberth. So this is the south side of Narberth, and there are 4 blocks and one side of Rockland Avenue, which has no parking. The first 3 streets closest to the train station are restricted. Marion Avenue isn't. Marion Avenue already really feels the weight of commuters, train commuters who park there. And, there's not that much space. And I'm on the 200 block. The 100 block is very dense. People have more cars than they used to when the current zone was developed. And that stood for the church also. In the last 25 years that I've been here, when the church existed, there were 9 members. And they had the right to park in SEPTA's parking lot on Sunday. So I wonder what happens when, there's nowhere else for it to move, really. So if residents on Marion Avenue say, enough, we need to park on our street, then what? Then where do people go? There's no place else. So that's one concern. Another is a question, which is what's different about, say, an accounting office that might have clients coming every half hour or something, and psychological services where there might be 1 appointment an hour. I don't understand how that distinction's made, and wonder if anyone can speak to it.
We're, I think, happy to consider additional uses. Again, that's why to be precluded, which is why we drafted this in a way that we could just add accounting onto that. That's something that council also felt had a high use. I think the sense was, quite frankly, that it doesn't have as much of But
mean,
the-
I think it has to be stated not just what type of business, but what type of usage, how
Right.
many people would be coming. You know, otherwise, it's very arbitrary.
Right now, it does say administrative, clerical, real estate, financial, governmental, and certain professional operations. I mean, that's the general sense. So if I'm coming in there as a tenant, I'm going to try to list my use into one of those broader uses. If council disagrees that you're not administrative, then that's going to be a dispute that would need to be hashed out. In order to get around that dispute, for certain uses, that's why we specifically listed some of those uses that we thought would be particularly troublesome. But again, I think the public feedback period is, hey, if you have more uses on that you would like to run by council to see whether it should be specifically added to that list, that's
I think
that's the
it's more
process.
that it should be based on what, you know, that there should be numbers attached to it and not just what type of business.
And I also hear you saying that it's really important. I think you're making a good point about the expectation that it's really an employee workspace only. It's not a workspace that has any customers or visitors coming from the outside. It's definitely an employee workspace.
So I think anything that's not, I mean, I'm for all residential without a doubt, but, you know, in this discussion, I just feel like that has to be really considered.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'm Jim Herring from Chestnut Avenue, and we ran a canvassing of the people who live in South Narberth, and the overwhelming result of the canvassing was that the people did not want commercial things in South Narberth. And it was the vast majority, I'm sure some of the gals back here have a much better figure of the number, but it was very clear that the people that live in South Narberth do not want commercial things in South Narberth. And I think that was very crystal clear, and I don't understand why it appears that people just keep right on going on as though commercial is just fine in South Narberth. It's not, according to the people that live there. I want to comment.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm Chris Calvert, I'm 161 Marion Avenue, and I just want to reiterate what's already been said. My house is on a corner, the front is 2-hour parking, the Marion Avenue is not 2-hour parking. I get up in the morning, I watch everybody from the train come, park their cars all up and down that street, leave their cars for at least the whole day, often for the weekend if they go to 30th Street and they're going away. The streets that don't have 2-hour parking are full. I don't understand where you're going to find these spaces. I just don't get that. Unless you go, I don't know, across Bowman Avenue. If you walk through South Narberth, you'll see that all those streets are full. Where are they going to find another 10 to 15 spaces? I don't get it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Pamela Santer from Woodside Ave. I just have a question, and I was trying to look at the original version of the amendment, but is it typical to have the enforcement of a zoning statement embodied in the borough council as opposed to the borough manager or somebody who knows the zoning laws, that is their job?
Sure. So this really deals with a conditional use. So what would happen at a conditional use hearing is there would be a conditional use order that would be issued, almost like a judicial order, but it's a legislative order from this body. To enforce the conditional use provisions that this council puts on, that is not an appropriate enforcement through the zoning officer. That would be something that this council would need to enforce And I would recommend doing it through filing injunctions in the Court of Common Pleas if they felt that that order was being violated as a violation of an order, just like it was any other court. So any aspects related to the conditional use provisions that would be installed, or there are requirements that certain conditions be placed in covenants or association agreements that would go in. And normally, council wouldn't have any standing to challenge because they're not the landowner, they're not someone that's living there. This gives them the right to intercede in those matters to enforce those covenants that have to be put in. So in those aspects, that would be enforced by council. As opposed to if they're building a building and they don't have the amount of impervious coverage, or they exceed or they don't meet parking requirements, and there are actual zoning code issues that were violated that are in the zoning code, those would be enforced by the zoning officer. So if it falls under the zoning code and a zoning violation, which still comes into play, again, that's the zoning officer. If it's a violation of the condition council imposes, that would be enforced by council in court. And there was a recommendation, quite frankly, from the planning commission that if you put on a zoning officer, I don't think that's proper. It may not actually be legal. And I believe it would be quicker for council to just file an injunction when they see that something is being done that shouldn't be done to enforce that order, than it would be to have the zoning officer issue a enforcement violation and have that scheduled for the zoning hearing board. The zoning hearing board wouldn't be able to enforce a council order. It would be up to the court. So hopefully that's a long answer. I'm just trying to
No, I
be
get
as
it. It's just
possible.
is odd to put enforcement in the executive branch.
Well, this is. Well, there are conditional use provisions throughout the zoning code now, and if, for example, the residential buildings that were built under this ordinance were done by conditional use, had they violated those conditional use provisions, this council could immediately file an action to stop them from doing what they are doing. I don't know if I would classify council as the executive branch,
Right,
it's more the legislative body.
Okay, but certainly not the ones that usually enforce them. I mean, there's a fire inspector, he usually enforces.
And they're still there.
Yeah, I know.
For the safety, for the building inspector is still going to be doing their work, but just for the special conditions that make these buildings unique. The uniqueness is what's tied to the conditional use decisions. To make sure they stay there.
In the instance where there were conditions at the Methodist church that didn't appear to fit, it was the planning commission that brought those to the council's attention, and then there was an administrative action taken by the office to request that they fix them. So,
Well, that makes sense.
Kimberly Busak, 237 Dudley. I just wanted to clarify from what I was hearing tonight that there's, with the parking issue and the South Narberth side seeming to not have a lot of available parking. With the Elmwood project, there's nothing that would prohibit council from recommending or mandating that the owner would provide employees with parking on the north side, or recommend that the owner would work out a deal for a contract in like a municipal or a private lot for the employees to park. That way the south side wouldn't be absorbing the parking necessarily. You could look to the north side if council.
If it was reasonable to say, hey, employees, you need to walk this far to go to work, and there's space here. What is reasonable? I mean, that's how far do you walk to a bus or to a train? I mean, that's what